Your expected approach time 3-4, approach button 17, the altimeter 2997.
Welcome back to the DCS SITREP. This is Prickly Hedgehog. Thanks for tuning in again to the channel, and for more information and opinions all about DCS World and the updates going on right now as we come close to the end of the 2022 year, and what a busy year it's been for DCS World. Now, this past week we saw a major patch and an injection of numerous fixes and updates, some of which we covered regarding the South Atlantic map from RASBAM last week. As mentioned, the map now sports the 2.8 lighting effects, the second map in-game outside of Persian Gulf to receive this treatment, which brings massive levels of immersion to night, dusk, and dawn flying experiences, and we'll jump back to that topic shortly. ED advised that the Viper received a large number of fixes, including corrections to the HMCS features and improved Mark 84 CCIP accuracy, among other things. Wags put out a video last week of some of the changes, including the ACM ball sight mode using the HMCS, which was a nice reminder of why the Viper was one of the aircraft by which all others were measured for air-to-air combat. It also served as a reminder of the tech available in a Gen 4 aircraft and what pilots have at their disposal for situational awareness. And it also made me think, well, what's available in the Gen 5 aircraft, such as the F-22 Raptor and, of course, the F-35 Lightning. The progress being made on the Viper is obviously welcome news, each iteration of changes strengthening its function as a multi-role platform for DCS World and therefore a versatile asset for the virtual pilot and virtual squadron. It is very much mimicking its real-life role in-game now, and it's exciting to see it move ahead to meet the progress on the Hornet, the two projects having similarities. In addition to these fixes, changes were made to the HARM systems, Maverick systems, as well as some radar issues and the HMD, which were ironed out. Most other aircraft also received minor or potentially extensive updates last patch, ranging from the MiG-19 to the Viggen, and a texture template for the Mosquito was added as well. One thing I was very excited to see was the increasing of the wake length for the supercarrier, which of course at around 100,000 tons and moving at speed displaces a lot of water. The wake itself is used by pilots as a reference point around the back of the boat, I understand, so tweaks to the realism here is always welcome. And looking at this, I think they've done a pretty decent job of recreating this effect, and of course it will vary based on the speed of the wind against the need for the carrier to bridge the gap. If you have 15 knots over the deck, there's really no need for the carrier to be doing 30 knots or so, which is pretty much at, I would guess, maximum speed. In short, the faster the carrier is moving, the bigger the water disturbance, as you can see in some of these real shots, which is pretty cool. We also saw an interesting snippet from ED a while back on Twitter showcasing some interesting sea states around the carrier, which looked mighty realistic. Sea state will also influence the shape and presence of the wake, and I'm looking forward to more revelations in realism in this area. As part of the supercarrier update, ED also plugged in the option for a recovery S3 tanker that will now be paired with the boat for bolter situations. This will need to be added via the mission editor, but is a welcome injection of realism for carrier ops, and no doubt we'll see it more in future missions and campaign developments, hopefully with that upgraded skin we've been promised. And for those of you who own the Total Controls MFDs, ED have added profiles for those as well, which I was pleased to see, as I have picked up those several weeks ago, and I've enjoyed being able to use those. They've been a great help.
Let's go with the checks here.
I'm going to turn now a little bit to more of a general discussion about 2.8 and the future of DCS World and where I think things might be going. Over the last few weeks, I've been tinkering with this new 2.8 update, and I really enjoyed what ED have done, and it got me thinking about the future of DCS World. The lighting and effects for 2.8 signal the direction that ED is taking to tweak the core environment in DCS World, which I think is obviously welcome and very, very aesthetically pleasing. There are three broad areas I see, though, as critical for the game's ongoing success. Number one is the core mechanics that we've seen with the introduction of Edge 2.7 last year and 2.8 this year, which saw further enhancements to clouds and lighting and has really brought the game to life. And we'll come back to this in more detail shortly with reference to the South Atlantic map as a way of an example. The second area will be the continued development of modules, which are some of the big draw cards for players looking to stay immersed in the simulation. We've seen a thrust in the direction of Cold War aircraft recently, particularly from third-party developers, like the Sky Raider, for example, which have been well received by the community at large. The high-fidelity modules are what most players are looking forward to flying, and while the older planes lack the modern avionics, their flight models and mechanical nature present their own challenges, which have, again, broad appeal in the community base. The F-15E, the Phantom F-4, and the Eurofighter will be very big sale items for the respective developers and likely attract a lot more players and what I understand is a growing base of players with a passion for military aviation in the community. The last area of significance is the assets available in-game, and I'm going to also throw in here the dynamic campaign, which many of you continue to ask for and hope it'll be akin to things seen in games like Falcon 4 BMS. While air-to-air combat has its appeal, at some point players are going to want to bomb things, be shot at by things, and in short, we need a variety of targets to do this. Some of these arrive as era-specific maps inserted in the game, which bolsters the ranks of equipment available to us, and certainly asset variety is going to be important for a dynamic campaign in whatever guise that comes in. I think the dynamic campaign is going to be very, very important for building a much bigger appeal for air warfare and air warfare combat, which is typically a little bit more restrictive in the current guise that we have because it's more isolated with specific missions and doesn't give you the full taste of what that dynamic environment might be like. And I don't think we're quite there yet, and I know ED is building on that and looking at ways to make it realistic. There were some challenges there for them, and we haven't really seen all that much in terms of information about what the dynamic campaign is going to look like and where it is in terms of development. Of course, the big problem that we have is the lack of comprehensive Red 4 aircraft, primarily Russian Air Force assets, full fidelity Su-27, Su-30s, and so on and so forth. These are not currently in the game as full fidelity modules and are limited in their use right now. Nonetheless, it's not necessarily a deal breaker. There are other ways in which we can create some Red 4 assets, but to do it realistically, some of those things perhaps are missing from the game. Those aren't necessarily the core issues that I have heard ED talk about in the past. So really, we are a little bit in the dark about what ED is doing with that campaign process, where it's at, and what currently are the stumbling blocks to that. All I know is that Simon Pearson in the past has talked about it being a very, very complex issue and a complex project that, for them to unravel. Many community members will disagree with me, but I think 2.8 was really a very important update to the core engine given the competition and high expectations that we have today for video game environments. The dynamics of the lighting and the clouds add high levels of immersion and also potential challenges for executing missions, which is a lot of fun to work around. We can't ignore the fact that with the eye candy available in many of our modern video games is going to draw users away and distract them from DCS World, which, let's be real, has a pretty steep learning curve, and that can be off-putting for players just trying to get into the game and wanting to fly, especially with the lack of the dynamic campaign as a way of engaging for repetitive gameplay. And part of this perhaps may also be a lack of knowledge about how to best take advantage of getting into DCS as a hobby. I do think that the lack of the dynamic campaign probably, as I said, hinders some players' ability to connect tangibly with the product for, as I mentioned, replayability. Although there are some excellent linear campaigns out there right now worth looking into. One area in particular which offers promise are the campaigns which are focused on training, such as Reflected Sim's Zone 5 campaign for the F-14A and Baltic Dragon's Iron Flag campaign for the A-10C2 as examples. These will help you get into the nuts and bolts of your aircraft, which will make you a much better pilot and therefore much more effective in any dynamic campaign situation. I'm very much looking forward to Reflected's Speed and Angels campaign, which looks ready to release here fairly soon and features former F-14 and A-6 pilot Paco Garici as your instructor pilot with the F-14B. If you haven't seen the movie Speed and Angels, which is produced by Paco, it's well worth the watch and of course free to Amazon Prime users. I really do believe there is a market for tutorials and campaigns which focus on basic airmanship in the game, but this is a topic perhaps for a different time than what I've titled, Why I Suck at DCS and So Can You. Let's dip into some of the 2.8 features that I really enjoyed looking at over the last few weeks, especially in those cloudy environments where the lighting is just right, say at dusk or dawn. Firstly, you'll notice that the ambience is truly magnificent. It really does look and feel incredibly realistic right now. The casting of light and color across the cloudscape is absolutely beautiful and can make for some dramatic backdrops for cinematic screenshots, or for those of you who enjoy being cinematic developers out there. With the winking and twinkling of lights, we get much more depth to our environment, and it's easy to pick out airfields from a distance and follow major roads as a reference point to areas on the map, such as airports and so on and so forth. As the light fades in the general environment, that lights on the ground from objects will come on in different phases, which is a really nice touch and again builds on the realism within the environment, which I really like and enjoy. You'll notice too that the hangars now properly splash light and illuminate objects within inside, while moving out of the hangar increases the darkness appropriately. This was never a thing before. Objects inside the hangar often looked black and there was no casting of light from illumination inside the hangar. So again, a small touch of realism and immersion which ED has put in here, and it gives developers of objects and maps a lot to play with to embellish our flight experiences. There are people out there that love this kind of stuff just to play with creating interesting situations with objects on the map, which I've really enjoyed seeing. And I was with Spectre last week for the South Atlantic map. He was showing me some police vehicles and the way in which their emergency lights splash all over the environment, which is really cool. Now, expect to see further tweaks in this area, obviously, in terms of lighting and ambient effects, I think, as we move into 2023, especially, I hope, in terms of rain and snow effects, which I think have gotten a lot more realistic, but still need a little bit more tweaking. I'd love to see, for example, dust kick up for landing helicopters, being a little bit more realistic, or even snow in winter environments. I talked to a rescue helicopter pilot here in Minnesota a few years ago who described that snow dust kicking up just before you come into land can be quite a hazard as you get a little bit disorientated from the blindness and potential for loss of SA. So kind of a cool thing to experience, and this has come up in discussions with helicopter pilots in DCS World 2 in our desert environment. So a neat kind of feature I'd love to see. I think that will do for now. I will leave the map here to do some of the talking and some of the features that I've enjoyed over the last few weeks. So this brings us to the end of this week's SITREP. I want to thank ED for all the work that they've done on 2.8, and I'm looking forward to what's coming in 2023. There's no more news yet on the Phantom, and I have a few videos planned before the end of the year recapping some of the highlights for 2022 and refreshing our memories on all of the projects that we have seen introduced this year. So stay tuned, take care, be kind to all kinds out there, and we'll see you next time on the DCS Situation Report.